Hey guys, welcome back to the video. Today I'm with Shaurya and I'm pretty sure you might have checked out his YouTube channel. He is a Stanford student, does a bunch of things, one of the smartest people I have met. And today we'll be discussing a bit about Stanford, about applying abroad, what's the process, and is it even worth it? Thanks, Shaurya, for joining in.
Thank you so much for having me, Harish. I think I'd first seen your videos a while back, and you were one of the people who had public subscriptions on. So I saw that you'd subscribed to my channel, and I lost it. You were such a big creator back then. But yeah, very, very happy to be here, and hopefully something of what I say can be of value to your audience.
Yeah, definitely. So, Shaurya, just take us back to your 11th and 12th grade. What kind of student were you? Were you super smart? Were you like a high school head boy? What kind of student were you?
Yeah, so I'd say okay. So I was head boy of my school eventually in 12th grade, but I was never a topper. I
Mm-hmm.
never wanted to be a topper. To be very honest with you, I felt like it's just that idea of rank one. If you come rank two, then you're like, why didn't I come first? And for me, I always knew I wanted to apply to the US in some shape and form, and I knew that to get into the United States in your undergraduate or even your postgraduate for that matter, you don't necessarily need to come first. You need to be in the top few percentage. So as long as you're in that upper threshold of your grade, you're good to go. And as a student, I was always like, what can I do outside of the classroom that would interest me? So this whole idea of side hustles that's coming up, I practically did that throughout my high school career. I was always like, what startup can I create? What internship can I do? What skill could I possibly learn that might help me out in the future? So video filmmaking was a huge part of that right in the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's naturally what has led eventually to my YouTube channel today. But yeah, that's how I was in high school. I was always looking for what can I do that's just outside of the classroom.
Which board were you in?
So I studied in the Shriram School Ravli. It's in Gurgaon, and it was the ICSE board, which then becomes the ISC board when you go to 11th and 12th.
Yeah, same in my case. So what do you think about the board exams? Did they like contribute to your admission at Stanford? Does it even
So
matter?
so the 12th grade board exam didn't matter at all because like I got I think I got like 98%, but the thing was that Stanford had already accepted me, and the
Mhm.
good thing about US college applications is that it's almost unconditional, in the sense that if you don't flunk, you don't get zero, they will still let you in. Like just avoid like getting 50%, and I think most people do reasonably well in boards. And in 10th grade, I'd say the board marks do help, because everybody knows that you're going to fail in your school exams, but boards may inflated marks aate hain, like they just push your marks up. So I think that's always a good thing. But yeah, I'd say that my 10th grade boards helped a lot, but they didn't help as much because in 11th grade, everyone does worse than they did in 10th grade. And for US college applications, if you don't know, you should ideally have an upward sloping graph or like a consistent graph, so that immediate tank and then up in at 12th grade. I think
Mhm.
that's something that's not too great, but I couldn't avoid.
That's interesting. Um, so did you even consider like applying to Indian entrance exams, like say JEE Mains?
I didn't, just because as a person, I'm very bad at multitasking. And I feel like in general, people are bad at multitasking. You're not made to do multiple things. So, like, even forget India in terms of like Oxford and Cambridge, really elite institutions in the UK, I chose not to apply to them, because it just has a different way of looking at the application process. And I just wanted to put all of my energy into one thing because I felt like if I focused on one thing, the chances of me doing well at it would have been far better. And the JEE, it's a 4-year grind. Now kids are starting off in 7th grade and 8th
Mhm.
grade if you look at White Hat Junior's advertisements or Baiju's advertisements. So it's something that I knew I didn't want to do. Plus, I wasn't interested in engineering. I feel like that's also an important thing to say. As a student, I was very clear that I only wanted to do what I was interested in. So even if you look at Indian colleges and UK colleges, you have to say that you want to apply for a major, right? And then you're
Mhm.
locked into that major for the next 3 years. Compared to that in the United States, and this is partially, actually almost wholly why I applied to the United States, you have a huge amount of flexibility. You can go in for psychology, come out as a computer science student, go in as a philosophy student, come out as a filmmaking major. I think that flexibility is very important because truth is you don't know what you want in high school. Like nobody is telling you, nobody is helping you explore what you truly want. You've just been given a textbook and you study. If
Mhm.
you're a science student, you're a science student, humanities student. I had the opportunity, like not opportunity, but like my school was nice enough to be like, okay, you can pick a mixed batch of subjects. So my subjects in 11th and 12th were maths, physics, economics, psychology, and then English. So I was fairly multidisciplinary in my high school subjects also.
Fun fact, even I applied to the US, I applied to every single Ivy League, got rejected by all of them. And one of the reasons was
Jesus.
that in 11th, 12th grade, I never had the exposure. I just knew this one friend at Princeton, another guy at Harvard who just replied to my text sometimes. I did not have a Shaurya Sinha YouTube channel back then. And I feel a lot of students face this issue, right? They don't have the exposure because in most Indian colleges, sorry, in most Indian schools, they never teach us or coach us towards applying to the US. So, what do you think? How can students know about what the procedure is? Because every college has a different procedure. Common App might have a different procedure. How can students just be aware of how do you apply to the US?
Right. So I think technically it's not that hard. Like if I had to break down the US college application process, there are 5 parts to it. You have your academics, which is school academics. You have letters of recommendation, which your teachers are going to be writing for you. Then after that, you have your college application essays, which are the essays you're sending to this college. Then you have your extracurricular activities, which is the one part that a lot of students get most intimidated by. And then the last part is standardized testing. So if you're taking the TOEFL, you're taking the ACT, you're taking the SAT. And I think that with students, the biggest thing that you need a lot of time to work on is your extracurricular activities. But I feel like schools nowadays are doing this, but they should do it more. Just promote more extracurricular activities, whether that's MUNing, whether that's theater, whether that's debating, whether that's entrepreneurship for that matter, because that's something I was really passionate about. I think that trying to see how you can spend your time outside of the classroom on things other than your studies while still prioritizing your studies is really important. So when I was in 11th and 12th grade, I created an organization called Spectraverse, which was a recruitment platform to give differently abled adults employment opportunities. And it's something I'd been working out throughout high school. So from 10, I had the idea in ninth grade itself, and then in 10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th grade, I really built the company up. I scaled it to like international chapters where I worked with students across the world. So I think that a lot of students limit themselves in their ability to think of what they're capable of doing. Like social media gives you the opportunity to connect with students regardless of boundaries. So if you're creating a startup and let's say you want to have a branch of that, let's say it's an NGO, right? You want to have a branch of that NGO in, Spain. You can connect with a student in Spain now. Like there are so many ways by which you can network, even through LinkedIn, for example. A lot of high school students are creating LinkedIn accounts nowadays. And I think it's really valuable because it gives you the opportunity to reach out to mentors. And another huge thing is this whole idea of mentorship.
Mm-hmm.
Because let's say you're really interested in digital marketing. While school isn't teaching you much about digital marketing, you can take an online course certification, but there's this huge volume of information in the world out there on, let's say, digital marketing, right? Sometimes it's very helpful to have a mentor who can really tell you, okay, focus on this, don't focus on this, this is where the industry is shifting, this is what you can focus on in the future. So I think those kind of things are very valuable. So cold emailing mentors, connecting with them over LinkedIn. And when you're cold mailing, the one piece of advice I usually give is try to find something that connects both of you. So whether that's a language, whether that's your location, whether that's your education, anything that can warm up that cold mail is really helpful. So I think that extracurricular activities, not limiting yourself to what you're actually capable of, mentorship, and then cold mailing to these mentors. Those are 4 things I would say that
Hmm.
students should focus on now.
Interesting. Yeah, cold mailing is super important. I think you just have to show up. You have to be really shameless in terms of DMing random people who might help you out. And I think, yeah, finding mutual connections is also super important. Um, Now, this is a personal question. I've met a lot. You're 18, right?
Yeah.
I've met a lot of 18-year-olds, and in terms of the intellectual thinking ability and creativity, I think you're a bit notch above. So, why do you think you're a bit smarter than the rest?
Absolutely not. I don't think I think the idea of smart, it's
Mm-hmm.
okay. Number one, it's a variety of things, right? You give me a
Mm-hmm.
maths textbook, a JEE kid is going to crack me hollow, right? That kid is objectively smarter than I am.
Mm-hmm.
I think the one thing that I've really tried to focus on over the last few years is just this idea of initiative and taking initiative. I think a lot of people have the ability to analyze a problem. A lot of people have the ability to come up with an idea. But I think where my strength lies is just executing that idea. And I
Mm-hmm.
also do believe that you learn a lot more from the execution of something than just from like sitting and planning and thinking. So even in high school, I was like for video editing, for example, if I had to approach video editing, I'd never take like a course on it, which is ideally not something you should do. I just start messing around with Premiere Pro, be like, how can I make a video out of this in 2 days?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's just how I've been taught. And I don't attribute this to myself, obviously. This whole perspective on the US application process, this whole idea of initiative, like I think a lot of it is to do with your surroundings. So I think whether it was my teachers, whether it was some of my really close friends who I looked up to, seniors in school who I looked up to, and even my parents, I think most of it I'd say is just my parents and how they've raised me. I think that's how I really try to be, as ambitious or as initiative taking as possible when it comes to all of these things.
I think just being curious and just thinking independently and tackling problems is what makes you slightly smarter, I would say. Because we're so used to spoon feeding, right? Even in terms of academics, right before the exam, we ask for sample papers, or maybe past papers, things like that. We just want like a set template or a roadmap towards how you should move towards your career. And I think that's what sort of hampers a lot of students' creativity. Like there are so many students who just give up on, say, art, or who give up on singing in the 11th and 12th grade just because they have this academic pressure and the societal pressure of, say, giving JEE Mains. And I think that should be avoided. And that's something where the US education system also comes into play, right? I like the fact that a lot of colleges, especially the top tier colleges, look at your extracurriculars in addition to your academics. Because if you have to, like in India, it's a compromise. If you're good at extracurriculars, you have to compromise in your CADs and vice versa. But when you look at it from both, I mean, when you just combine both the aspects, that leads to like an all-rounder who's super creative, really curious about what they want to do in life, and they're independent thinkers. So outside influence, societal influence doesn't play much of a role in terms of what they pursue in the future. Do you think that plays an important role?
Definitely. I think that, on your point, well, firstly, when it comes to sample papers, I would also ask for sample papers. I think that if you're an ICSE, CBSE, if you can understand the game, like play the game, I really believe in the Pareto principle in the sense that like 80% of your results come from 20% of your work. So like I literally go through sample papers and
That's
like
not how
past
life
question
works
books.
later on.
Yeah, but like I, I literally get entire questions just like imported from those papers into my book.
Yeah.
But even beside that, like if I look at my extracurricular activities, I was only able to reach this startup. Like people would be like, oh, did you just wake up one day decide to do a startup? No, like I first tried debating, I tried MUNing, I tried filmmaking, and then when I started filmmaking, I went to this NGO, and that was an NGO which had specially abled children. And I really liked the cause that they were working towards. I thought it was really important, and I wanted to use my film as a lens to project, what was happening in an NGO like this and how people with disabilities were getting discriminated against. And then eventually, I realized that when these children are graduating from this NGO, they go to the real world where things like implicit and explicit discrimination are extremely real, right?
Mhm.
So there's no NGO over there. Then they need to get a job, and that's when I was like, okay, is anybody helping these individuals get a job? And there was no organization. I was like, oh, I could create that organization. So if you open up 10 doors for yourself, and like one of them eventually opens up into the startup, it was only because you opened up those 10 doors. Like
Mhm.
giving yourself two paths and then not finding any of those paths successful and then saying, oh, I don't need to do any extracurricular, I don't think that's the right way to approach it. Like keep sampling, keep trying, and eventually I do believe you'll find something that you can really
Yeah.
gravitate towards.
So even Nitin Kamath, the founder of Zerodha, he gave a similar analogy. So when he started Zerodha, I think he was in his 30s,
Hmm.
I think. And people are like, oh, this guy just woke up one day and in 10 years, he built a unicorn, right? A completely bootstrapped unicorn without raising external capital. And that's when he said that he had the core competency to do that. For the past 10 years, like before starting Zerodha, he had been day trading. So that was his full-time career, right? Trading on the stock market, looking at different graphs, and then making decisions. And he's been doing that for 10 years, and that's like grunt work, and no one spoke about him at that point in time. So I think it's that core competency that you develop, and that's when you have zero attention, and but eventually that core competency might turn into something really cool. So it's a huge process, and people usually tend to disregard that. And I think that's a fair enough point that you brought up.
Yeah, and like even with the whole idea of core competencies, like if you can edit videos, you start talking in front of the camera, you can launch a YouTube channel, right? But
Mm-hmm.
those skills that require you to be a successful YouTuber, you might have built over the last 10 years, whether that's communication
Fair
skills,
enough.
whether that's video editing, whether that's, like people sometimes will say, oh, you're making like 2 videos a week about the college application process. It is a result of my past 4 years of experience, right? Which I'm choosing to give for free on a platform like this. I just didn't like read a book or like purchase a course that taught me all of these things. So, and people also undervalue the value of their own information. So like if you're a college student, 99 out of 100 college students will be like, oh, I'm doing a side hustle, but I'm just doing it for myself. Someone like you would be like, I'm doing a side hustle, what can other people learn from this? So I think slightly on the spreading information and helping people be more aware, that initiative is present in someone like you as well. So I think that's really valuable.
Yeah. Cool. Were there any other colleges that you applied to apart from Stanford?
Applied to a bunch of schools. I think so. 15 was like the hard limit my school had given me, and they refused to let me apply to more than that. But in terms of the Ivy Leagues, I applied to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and then Columbia and University of Pennsylvania, and then I applied to Stanford. Stanford is not an Ivy League, contrary to popular belief. And then I applied to UCs, four UCs, so UC Berkeley, UC Irvine, UC Santa Barbara, and UC San Diego. And then in California, I also applied to the University of Southern California. And I also applied to Pomona College, which is in the Claremont Consortium. And then I also applied to NYU Stern, which is the business school of New York University. And then I also applied to University of Michigan and then University of Virginia.
Mhm.
So if you look at the colleges I applied to a liberal arts college, like a very small liberal
Super
arts college like
diverse.
Pomona. I applied to business school. I also applied to places like Stanford. So I think that should be reflective of how confused I was going into this process. I did not know what I wanted to study. So I think, yeah, I think that's just I try to
And
take the
what
advantage
were the
free that system.
results?
So I got, so in terms of my acceptances, I got into University of Michigan, I got into University of Virginia, I got a full tuition scholarship from University of Southern California, and then I got into NYU Stern as well. I got into Pomona College. And then in terms of the Ivy Leagues, I got waitlisted at Princeton, I got waitlisted at Columbia, I got waitlisted at one more college I'm forgetting, and then I got rejections from Yale, Harvard, and um, uh, Yale, Harvard, and University of Pennsylvania. And then I got my acceptance at Stanford finally.
That's great.
So it was, yeah, it was a roller coaster for me. A lot of people
Mhm.
have seen my college decisions reaction video, where I sort of like got this initial high, and then like I completely tanked on Ivy Day, where I got like barely anything I'd wanted. And then finally, Stanford came in.
Wow.
But yeah, oh, and then I also got into UC Berkeley and I got into Duke University.
Don't people get super anxious when they get waitlisted?
Yeah, I was super anxious to be honest, but then after I got Stanford, I was very happy because I applied early to Stanford. So that was like my
Oh.
number one university I wanted to go to. So I was like, it doesn't really matter if all of these places haven't decided to take me. Like, as long as Stanford says yes, I have nothing to complain
Hmm.
about.
Hmm.
But again, as a numbers game, it's very hard. You're an Indian citizen. So many students are applying from our country. We have about a 4% acceptance rate for Stanford. And that 4%, by the way, is only for US, like it's
Yeah.
probably for US citizens. The acceptance rate is probably much lower for Indian students. So I was really realistic about it in the sense that, there's a high chance you might not get in. But I think so I got deferred and then I got accepted. So when I got deferred, they said, do you have an update to send? And it was at that time that for Spectreverse, which is the work I'd done with differently abled individuals, I was recognized by the Pradhan Mantri Bal Shakti Puraskar, which is, meeting the President of India. I think they say it's like one of the highest civil award that someone under the age of 18 can get. So then I told Stanford that, and they were like, "Acha, ab aa jao." So I think that was something that really played into my
So how
favor.
does the deferred process work? Why do they defer people?
So Stanford specifically has a kind of an interesting deferral process in the sense that if you apply early, they defer a lower number of students than they accept. So if they accept, let's say, 10% of their early application pool, or 11%, I believe they defer about 8 to 9%. So in my case, it's a good indicator because it means you're really good, but there's something that they want from you more. Or in most cases, they want to get the regular pool in and see how you might fit in with all of those people. So they might be like, Shaurya is an entrepreneur. He's working in the disability field. He's a good filmmaker. Is there any other kid like him who might be better than him at what he does? So in that case, they're like, okay, hold on, Shaurya. Let's see 5 other applications like you. And if you're one of the best among them, we'll take you in. And in other cases, a majority of people get deferred. So it basically means that we're not going to get back to you now. We'll get back to you in the regular action pool. So I applied to Stanford on November 1st. I hear back from them on my early action on December 14th. And then the regular decision day was March 26th. So,
Hmm.
it's like, it's just getting pushed off, which is kind of anxiety inducing sometimes because you're like, man, I worked so hard for this. Like, can you tell me now? And
Hmm.
deferral is even more strange because it's like, it's not a yes, it's not a no, it's a maybe. But I think
Got
it
it.
was worth it in the end.
And what exams did you give to get into Stanford, apart from SAT and SAT subject tests?
So I took the ACT. So I got a 35 on 36 on the ACT. I took the TOEFL. I got a 120 on 120 on the TOEFL. And then I took 3 APs. So I took AP psychology, I took AP microeconomics, and I took AP calculus AB.
Mm-hmm.
For your viewers who are not maybe aware of what APs are, they're like the US's educational system kind of. So a lot of high school students take AP courses. It's basically a college level course. It's called an advanced placement course, and if you take it, you get college credits, which means you can skip certain classes at college. So a lot of people in the US, they'll be taking AP classes so that they can place out of like the entry level courses so that they can do more senior stuff immediately.
Okay. And is it necessary to take APs from India?
I mean, people are increasingly taking them because they want to differentiate themselves. It's kind of weird how we have to take the ACT, then show that we can speak English, when most of us can speak English, and take the
Mm-hmm.
TOEFL, and then go into their educational system and then take their exams and crush their exams. But I think that if you're in an IB curriculum, definitely no. But in CBSE and ICSE, like if you can, it can only help. Something to take into account is it happens once a year in May. Registrations open up in December, and it's a very expensive test, like 10 to 11,000 rupees.
Oh.
So it's not for everyone, and colleges recognize that. So admissions officers outright say, please don't take these exams. But everyone is trying to become an overachiever today. So I guess there's no stopping it. If an Indian student wants to get in, they'll try everything.
Yeah, true. Interesting. So you'll be moving to Silicon Valley next year.
Yeah.
How does that
Actually, no,
feel?
this September.
Oh, this September?
Yeah, so I took a gap year. So I was accepted in March 2020, and I would have gone to Stanford in September 2020, but because I took a gap year, that got pushed 1 year ahead. So September 2021.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, it's in person.
Got it. So you've been there before. You've interned at a couple of startups in the valley. How do you compare startup ecosystem? You live in Gurgaon, which also has a fairly good startup ecosystem. How do you compare these ecosystems? What's the difference you feel?
I think that at least when you come to a place like Stanford, I mean, it's very obvious that the big tech companies are all in Silicon Valley. So if computer science is something that you're really interested in, there's no better place to be. But interestingly enough, I was talking to a Harvard Business School student about 2 days ago, and she said that these companies are increasingly focusing on Asia, and they're focusing on the thriving ecosystems in Asia. So I think that if you look at a place like Bangalore, it's growing at a very rapid pace, even in terms of capital being supplied. The venture capital field is really thriving in India now. So I'd say that, I mean, there is no place like Silicon Valley, but I think India will be at that point in some point in time. But yeah, in terms of the benefits, at a place like Stanford, your professors can invest in your company. Like it's just
Oh,
it's a very encouraging environment for startups. Like in most cases, if you're in a university in India and you're pursuing a startup, your teachers might be like, oh no, like focus on your exams, don't focus on the startup as much, or it's a compromise, like you brought up
yeah.
before. Over there, it's almost like a natural desire to do it because everybody around you is doing it. So I think that's the benefit of an environment like that, because your environment, it has a huge role to play in who you are as a person. And these 4 years of your life are such formative years of your life, and what you
Mm.
do with it can practically decide what you are going to do in your future career. So I think that a place like Stanford, a place like the Bay Area, if you're interested in entrepreneurship like I am, and you're interested in psychology also, like Stanford is probably, I think, one of the best for psychology as well. That intersection, I think that for me, there was no better environment for me to put myself in and trust that would mold me to be the person I wanted to be.
Interesting. So you want to be in the startup ecosystem real soon?
For sure. I mean, I've been like in high school, I had an organization I created, right? In my gap year, I've also created a company where I created an online program and hopefully an algorithm someday to help students write their college application essays. So I think that especially when it comes to startups, especially when it comes to extracurricular activities, the best advice I have is like, do what you can't help yourself from doing. Like a lot of people will say, do what you love, but you might not know what you love. So like, what is that one thing that you will stay up in the night to happily do? What is that one thing you naturally find yourself doing? Like I always naturally found myself picking up a camera, and I was like, great, let me start a YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what you can't stop yourself from doing, those are the things. And that also provides value to your society, that also will earn you money, is financially feasible. Those things are also important to take into account. But I think that as an experienced entrepreneurship is something I've always loved.
Hmm. What's the name of the brand that you recently launched?
Sleep deprived dreamers. I really like the name. I think it's very indicative of how I am as a person. I personally believe that it's not enough to just have like dreams in the night. Like it's very important to manifest them in the
Mm-hmm.
world of the living. So that's what I believe in with the company, and we basically help undergraduate and postgraduate students write their essays. I basically, so like you might have seen Ali Abdal's video, but he ran like a live and interactive program called the Part-Time YouTube Academy. So I was very heavily inspired from that. And like I just opened up an application season for sleep deprived dreamers. So we're getting
Mhm.
on board like students from all across the world. Like we had like for our financial aid applicants, we had about like 12 countries who were applying. But yeah, so it's like from April 1st to April 30th, I basically teach people live how to write the college application essay, which should be really
Hmm.
interesting to
That's
have.
interesting. I like the fact that the creator economy is promoting a lot of creators to launch their own brands rather than
Right.
just depending on brand sponsorships from other companies. For
That's so
example,
true.
Ali Abdal launching his Skillshare course or him launching the Part-Time YouTube Academy. In fact, Part-Time YouTube Academy is one of the most popular cohort-based classes. I think he generates around $200,000 from every cohort, and that's a real business, right?
It
And
is.
a lot of products, like people code out the product but they don't have a distribution channel. But in case of creators, the cool part is that you already have a distribution channel because you have audience watching you, and therefore it's like you just have to build out the product. And then if you have a community, then you can just ask a community, hey, what do you want me to build? And after listening to the demand, you can sort of supply. That's a really cool concept. And good luck
Exactly.
with your new product. I hope people go and sign up for it. I think couple of people are applying for the postgrad as well, so
Yeah,
do check it out.
that'd be really helpful. Thank you, Harish. And creator economy is really interesting. I talk about this a lot as well. I think that creators are getting just more and more importance in today's day and age. Like there's a reason like Bollywood actors are creating their own YouTube
Mhm.
channels. Like it is the most authentic way to connect with a group of people without physically interacting with them at a scale at
Yeah.
which people could never do before. And like people always ask me, oh, like like YouTube barely pays you anything. You're running your startup. You're earning X amount of money. Why don't you just run your startup and give up YouTube? But I say that it's very important for people to understand that without YouTube, the startup would not have been given birth to, right? It's this really solid distribution channel you formed and this really solid funnel you've created that is just insanely valuable. Like there's a reason brands will be throwing money at creators today to promote their brands, because people realize that like forget traditional media, forget TV, forget like any traditional ad like a wallpaper, anything. If a
Yeah.
creator is telling you to buy something, it has so much more influence than anything else. And creators on their own part are also, instead of relying on these external brands, are launching their own companies. So like Clinify as an example, Sleep Deprived Dreamers as an example. It's an opportunity to have cross-platform growth, being independent from YouTube, because if YouTube shuts off tomorrow, what are you going to
Yeah.
do? So I think all of those things have such important pieces to play in the mind or in the creator ecosystem and the creator business. And I think it's going to become so much larger in the future.
Fair enough. And when unicorn companies like say Unacademy reach out, they're like, oh, why can't they just run ads? Why do they need us? And that's when I realized that, oh, because we have an audience, because they're so attached to us, the influence would be much, much larger, and the conversion rates and all of that will be much, much higher.
Exactly. And I think that I don't think YouTubers in India at least do this yet, but like people really need to collaborate and set a base price, because there's this
Mm,
huge just habit of
exploitation.
exploitation of creators because they realize how valuable you are, and you yourself might not have realized how valuable you are at some point in time. So I think that it's very important for creators to put a base price and say that this is what we are taking, like take it or leave it. And I think like that unionization is something that I feel like we haven't reached. And because of that, a lot of brands do take advantage of people. Like when you're a small
Yeah.
and growing creator, sometimes you're a little desperate, to be honest. Like you just like the idea of getting paid by someone else. But it's much more like I'd say like hold off. You have value, like wait for it, and then you'll be getting much better deals in the future.
Yeah, like I rarely do brand deals. I've just done three in the past, and all three were non-Indian companies. All of them were like European or US companies. So in terms
Exactly.
of how much they pay, there's a huge disparity.
Exactly. And I also feel like at some point in time, it's a vision you align with. Like you're not just gonna
Yeah, true.
do any like brand. Like I was reached out to an academy as well, like I told you, but like my students are not interested in the JEE prep system. They're not. That's not something that they want to go for. They want to apply to the US. So I was like, why would I thrust down something down their throat that they're not interested in just for a paycheck? And that paycheck is also nothing.
True.
So there's like I want to always be, and you also, I'm sure, always want to provide value to your community and never be like promoting and advertising for no reason.
Fair enough. Yeah, Stanford is expensive, right? Let's be honest there.
Yeah, it is.
Um, how much does it cost? And do you think there's okay? Let's just talk about the Ivy Leagues. I mean, including Stanford. How much does Stanford cost, and then how much do other similar colleges like Harvard cost?
I think they all cost around the same amount of
Okay.
money just for tuition. I'd say like, around $55,000 for tuition. But then if you add in, other expenses, you usually rack it up to $70,000, $80,000 per year. It is a very large sum to pay, and that's why they have robust financial aid programs. And I think in terms of financial aid, there are two kinds. You have you have need aware financial based programs, and you have need blind financial aid programs. And the basic difference between the two is Harvard is need blind, which means that they do not care about your financial status if they need to award you financial aid. If you're good enough, you're talented enough, they will give you financial aid, and they will fully fund you if they need to. They have a lot of colleges have this policy called we will meet your full demonstrated need, which means if you can provide like 10 out of 100, they will fill up your 90 out of 100. And that's basically how the system works. So Harvard, MIT, I believe Princeton, but don't quote me
Yeah.
on Princeton. So Harvard, MIT, Princeton, Yale, I believe, and then you have a few small liberal arts colleges like Amherst. They will provide need blind financial aid, and then need aware financial aid basically means that if you are coming from a background where you're not as financially fortunate, it will be harder for you to get an acceptance. But if you do get that acceptance while asking for financial aid, we will still cover your full demonstrated need. So for Stanford, for example, there was a student who'd come out of Jaipur, I believe, who got fully funded for Stanford. So it is possible, but it does make the process harder. And full disclosure, I did not need it. I come from a very a privileged background, so my parents were able to cover my costs. But I feel like with my startup and like interestingly enough with YouTube with my startup, I fully plan on funding my own college. So
That's
that's a
great.
goal I set for myself, and let's see if it happens.
That's awesome. And what do you think of the ROI? Like, in the US, I think student loan crisis is a huge problem. I think the student debt exceeds $1 trillion, as far as I know. So, what do you think of that particular situation? Do you think the ROI from, especially Indian students studying in the US, do you think the ROI is enough to cover it up? Or, like, what are your thoughts on that?
Uh, Honestly, I obviously don't have the right perspective on this
Mhm.
because I didn't have to go through that problem, so
Yeah.
I didn't fill any financial aid forms. But if you're looking at if it's an institution like Stanford, if it's like a top-notch institution, even if you look at how the H-1B visas are getting processed, it's turning into an increasingly meritocratic process, which means that they're going to be ranking you in terms of decreasing starting salaries. So I think that if you're going to a top-notch institution, you're doing a top-notch degree, it will be very, I feel like you'll be in a position where the ROI will be extremely strong.
Okay.
And then a little bit on the immigration process as well. If you're doing a STEM degree, for example, you get an additional year to stay on without necessarily having to file for anything. So I think that the US it's like their way of prioritizing what they really want. So
Mm,
if they're taking international students, they want to make sure that it's in the field of STEM, and they want to make sure that these are really, really bright kids. So I think in those specific instances, yes, the ROI is really, it's really strong. And it also depends on the field, right? If you're entering CS, your ROI is obviously going to be
yeah.
higher because you're getting paid more, and the opportunities over there are extremely high. But if it's like a field like, I don't know, psychology, the average salary is obviously going to be lesser. So I think that
Mhm.
it's very different for different people.
Do you think everyone should do CS?
I haven't done CS, if that makes any difference. I haven't learned to code. I still don't plan. I mean, I plan on doing it, but it's not something I want to major in. The way
Hmm.
I look at it is this: it's going to become a language like English in the future, and I think there's this huge difference. Like if I've said this once before, but if like Elon Musk originally said this when he was talking to Jack Ma at a
Hmm.
conference, but he said if you had to like turn the knowledge distribution about a field like computer science, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and make it like topographical, there's this huge spike right in the middle where like this small concentration of people are increasingly knowing more and more about this field at a really fast rate. And then you have the general population, which barely knows anything. This
Hmm.
difference in knowledge, that can turn into social classes at some point in time,
Hmm.
that can widen out and perpetually like change how your job prospects are in the future. You might not have a well-paying job if you have CS, because like even if you look at the startup ecosystem for that matter, if you go to Stanford today and you say, I want to start a startup, it is synonymous with saying, I want to have a tech startup. There's
Yeah.
practically no difference between the two. MIT, same thing. Like, yes, you have really good like wholesale startups, whatever, but the true differentiator today is technology because of its scalability and because of your ability to turn it into something that you have an IP on it because it's an
True.
algorithm, right? So you can
Mm.
make that your own. So I think the future is technology. And that being said, you don't need to major in computer science because that requires dedicating your life to computer science. All you need to do is be able to communicate the language. So I feel like you should have a fundamental understanding of it, like a threshold level of knowledge. Like, for example, to take a much easier to understand parallel, like art, for example, right? If
Mhm.
you're learning Adobe Photoshop, you don't have to be a master at Adobe Photoshop. You just need to know how it works so that if you hire someone who is a master at Adobe Photoshop, you know enough of what they're doing to give them advice and say, okay, change it like this, change it like this, change it like that. You need to be at the helm of the ship if you're an entrepreneur. So I think that you don't have to major in it, but it's crucial to have a base level understanding.
Fair enough. Even Sundar Pichai, he did metallurgy from IIT Kharagpur, uh, and then now he's leading artificial initiatives at Google. So I don't think majoring has an impact, but a general understanding of technology is super important. Even when you approach like venture capitalists, the very first question they ask is who's the CTO, who's going to write the code, and the person who's going to write the code has to be one of the co-founders. Like that's a must-have. So technology and code, that's going to change the world. And a brief understanding, as you said, right? It's just like a language. So most people today, they're like, hey, I have a startup idea, but I don't know how to, just code it out, build a product out of it. So for that, I think you should either have a really close friend who codes it out, or you should have a brief understanding about how I can build an MVP. So I think it's a super important skill to have.
Exactly. And then another thing I would say is that a lot of people, when they're starting up a business, there's this urge to say, oh, I need to create my own app, I need to create my own website. But the thing is, a lot of companies have recognized this people's desire to create something without having the technical capability to do so.
Hmm.
So if I look at Sleep Deprived Dreamers, it's essentially an e-learning platform, but I did not code out this entire website. I used a
Mm.
platform called Nourish, which is
Yeah.
basically like a Wix for
Hmm.
creating e-learning platforms. So a lot of times people feel the need to create this value out of nothing when it's very important to look around you and be like, okay, what can I build on top of? And I
Mm.
think that difference saves you time, because making your own website, it's a lot of money. I know people who've given like 80,000 to like 2 lakhs to create their own website versus using a subscription package of like 20,000 rupees for an entire 2 years. So I think that like that's something that a lot of entrepreneurs should know. It's much more important to get your product up and running than being
Mm.
like, oh, I need to make my own app, I need to make my own website, let me find a developer, let me pay these people who I might not necessarily even trust, versus
Hmm.
just going ahead doing it yourself, and getting it up.
I think no code platforms help a lot in making prototypes. So there's Bubble, there's WordPress that you can use to just ship out a quick MVP.
Exactly.
That's true. Yeah, I think even no code platform, right? Even that's a skill you got to learn. A lot of people don't know how to use Notion properly, and
Yeah.
I've seen so many people who know Notion really well, and they literally build websites out of Notion, like beautiful websites out of Notion with some functionalities. So even a good understanding of no code platforms can go a long way.
Exactly. Like they have so many capabilities that you might not like, you might just underestimate. You'd be like, oh, I
Hmm.
can do a better job. These people are working around the clock to give you a framework that you can build on top of.
True.
So
Hmm.
you have to go in with I think it's just humble yourself a little bit and be like, I can take someone
Hmm.
else's help. It's perfectly acceptable.
So last year I launched like a couple of friends and I launched like a free app for preparing for BITSAT, which is the entrance exam you need to get into BITS Pilani. So we had to make an app, but we used Glide app, which essentially turns a Google Sheet into a full-fledged application, a mobile app.
That's
So
crazy.
and the cool part is you don't have to download the app. It's called uh, I think it's called a browser app or something, wherein it's like
An
it just
extension?
adds. No, so you visit the website, and at the
Hmm.
bottom it says add it to your home screen. So you just tap on that, and it just stays on your home screen. So every time you click on it, it just opens up. There's no downloading process.
That's
It's a
really
cool
interesting.
concept, and I think that's like the future of applications or something. So you can check out Glide apps as well.
Yeah, I think that, like a lot of people have so many interesting business ideas, but not a lot of them do have the technical
Yeah.
knowledge. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's where these no code platforms come in.
Mm-hmm.
Like I keep seeing Bubbles ads, like I get bombarded by Bubbles ads. Oh, you can make an entire Instagram in less than 20 minutes. While that's not necessarily true, it will make your job a lot easier.